she remains tied to community. She remains true to the values and realities of the everyday woman.
All large-scale change is actually just a lot of small-scale change happening.
So to me, feminism is more of a social and political struggle against all forms of patriarchal oppression.
If you constantly find that you are the smartest person in the room, you've completely failed at feminist leadership.
Ignite that sparking others to have a passion for a particular cause.
So feminist leadership, one of the things we need to understand is not just about women playing leadership roles, being women or feminine. It's more of where women lead differently with feminist analysis, values, and ideologies to advance social justice for all.
Welcome to the Lead Like a Feminist podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm Malene.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn from the people using their power to change the status quo.
So as you all know, we've been trying to find our guests by asking you who you know is leading like a feminist. And then we've been making it our responsibility to track them down and try to find out exactly what they're doing that is changing the world around them. So join us and let's change the status quo together.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, and I show.
Hi everyone, I'm Cianne. I'm the founder of Women in Leadership, Uganda. Really great to be on the call today. Excited to have a conversation with you about leadership.
My name is Nakimuli Sharitah. I'm the founder of Girls Menarche Initiative, a non-profit organization in Jinja, and I'm really excited to be part of this. Thank you.
Great. I wondered if we could start by just hearing a bit about somebody who's inspired you and why. Cianne, can you share someone who's inspired you?
Yes, thanks, Emily. I think whenever somebody asks me about what's inspired me or who's inspired me, I always like to start with the inspiring women in my own family. And to begin, I think the first sort of inspiration I had was my grandmother, and mainly because she was prevented from pursuing higher education by her father. And she always had this desire to really instill in her daughters and her granddaughters this sort of passion for education that she wasn't able to have. And despite not being able to go on to education, she was still able to go on to work in the civil service. She then went on to work in the NHS for 40 years. And she just continued to really inspire all of us to work hard, to really work towards self-development and education and to supporting others. So my grandmother was really important in my life in terms of an inspirational role model. And I'd also say my mum as well. She was the director of a domestic violence charity for 20 years. And she was a single parent who used to actually take me to university with her because she was studying when I was quite young. And she again instilled in me a passion for education and a passion for supporting women. And in essence, she was really my first sort of example of female leadership at a very young age. So definitely the women around me and my family were really, really inspiring. I guess outside of my family, people that continue to inspire me are women who are really trying to drive change in their own communities. So women like Zai, who is the project manager of Women in Leadership, which is the organization I founded. And Zai, again, is a single mother who is in Uganda championing the rights of women and girls to access health, education, and income. And she's been doing that since 2014, really just leading and ensuring that women around her are able to access their human rights. So she's just another example for me of one of these just inspiring women who are just so passionate about women and supporting women and helping women to achieve. So I definitely say they're some of the people who are inspiring me at the moment.
Wow. What about you, Sharitah? Who's inspiring you?
So for me specifically, I don't have like a specific person that inspires me because I'm inspired by, like, as Cianne has said, I'm inspired by so many women that are trying to make our world a better place for the young girls that are coming up. And because as I was growing up, I saw a lot of women doing a lot of work, but they were never recognized in the community. And this affected me so much because I was always seeing these women struggling with their kids. I was raised by a single mom, and all the things that she did to raise all of us was very, very inspiring. And many of other women in my community were raising their own children. So I'm inspired by all women that are trying to do their best to create a better world for young girls and a better world for everyone to live in.
So tell us about your leadership journey.
So my leadership journey, it's been interesting because I started out working in the charity sector, and went from working in the charity sector, predominantly working with women who were survivors of gender-based violence, into working as a family solicitor, again, advocating for women who had been who are survivors of violence. So I started in those two fields, and later on went on to found Women in Leadership Uganda. And I guess my leadership journey began there with founding Women Uganda in 2014. And the organisation itself was born out of a needs assessment, which we did with women and girls in rural Uganda, which really sort of highlighted the inaccessibility of education, healthcare and justice in many rural communities. And I really saw an opportunity for me to support women who didn't necessarily have the support systems that I had been part of in the UK. And I collaborated with local women on the sort of setup and founding of Will Uganda, including Zai, who I've mentioned before, our program manager. And we went about founding this organisation that was female-led, feminist, and that would really start to tackle the inequalities that rural women were facing, and to start supporting them and empowering them to access their human rights. And I guess that was really the beginning of my leadership journey, being involved in that process of collaboration with women on the ground in Uganda, understanding their needs, and then asking them, how do you think this organisation can support you better? And Will Uganda started back in 2014 with just a laptop and 2 volunteers that I'd spoken to, who were really sort of passionate about women's rights, who lived in the communities that I wanted to work in. And now the organisation has gone on to have a full team of women staff. There's a network of 60 health programme volunteers that we work with. There are 10 gender-based violence advocates, and all of these women who are involved in this organisation are supporting other women. And I know you asked, what are we doing? So we have health programs, education programs, and income generation programs. But at the moment, I think one of the flagship programs that we're running at the moment, the Gender-Based Violence Project, or the Justice Project, is a really interesting project because it is ensuring that women have access to justice if they are survivors of gender-based violence. And this whole project came out of a piece of research that I did into rural women's access to justice. And that piece of research really highlighted that at the rural level, community level, women were just not able to access the police if they were victims of domestic violence. Their community members weren't supporting them. And there was this kind of attitudinal acceptance to violence against women at the community level. So this project that we're doing at the moment in the community, which is also funded by the Circle NGO, is so important because it's training this team of female gender-based violence advocates who are supporting women in their very own communities to access support. So whether that be speaking to a woman, counselling her and taking her to a health centre if she needs support from the health centre, or counselling her and taking her to the police so that she can report an incident of violence, these gender-based violence advocates and champions are there on the ground supporting women in their own community. So that's one of the projects that we're doing at the moment. And something that I'm really passionate about, because that's where I started in my whole career, was working with women who are survivors of violence. So it's really important to me that Uganda is now doing that work as well.
As I was growing up, I didn't have like any passion for anything. I was like this young girl that was not confident enough to share anything until I faced like a challenge that I couldn't stay away from. One day I was traveling in a taxi and there was this young girl that got her very first period in a taxi. She was putting on this white dress that got stained, and when she stood up to move aside for another person to pass, like everyone saw the stain on the dress and everyone was just, like making fun of her. The women were so embarrassed, like men were laughing, they were saying all these abusive words to her. I myself, I couldn't do anything because I couldn't go against this, and I wasn't that confident enough to protect this girl. So this kept on coming back to me every time I thought about this girl. This is when I realized that there is a challenge that our community needs to address, and that's period stigma. This girl was very, very embarrassed and she didn't say any word, but it was very heartbreaking to watch. So this is what inspired me to take on this leadership role, to start talking about menstruation and having such conversations about menstruation, so that at least we don't create more young girls that are stigmatized in our community because of this natural thing that is happening to them. So I decided to start an organization called Girls Menarche Initiative. We started in 2018 as a one-day project, but after our very first outreach that we did, these young girls appreciated the work that we're doing. They were so happy that we started these conversations. So this inspired me to make it big, so that at least it's not only in the community where this is happening, but the whole Uganda, because there was a lot of challenges that young girls face. And I myself, I never had about any conversation about periods before until I had my own periods. That's when I started learning about it, which is a very big challenge for so many young girls, and it's killing all our dreams. So with this Girls Menarche Initiative, we've designed different projects that help young girls to celebrate periods, that teaches young girls to express themselves, so that at least there are no limitations. In Girls Menarche, we have we created menstrual Santa to create happiness during Christmas, because I believe that no girl should stop herself from enjoying Christmas just because she has her periods and she doesn't have access to the proper menstrual products. So I designed the menstrual Santa to bring joy in these young girls in the slum areas and on the streets of Jinja. We have community and school outreaches, and so far we've reached out to more than 20,000 young girls in Uganda. We've distributed more than 20,000 reusable pads in different schools, in refugee camps, in different communities. And a project that started with only one person has 5 members now, and we get different youth volunteers that are really passionate about helping young girls. So that's our journey.
So Sharitah, I have to ask you, can you tell us about your period parties? Because I've seen pictures on Instagram. Can you describe to us what happens at a period party?
Thank you so much, Emily. So with period parties, it's like an event, a community event, that helps us to express, to educate our community about periods, and to also call upon the community engagement in our area to take part in helping young girls accept their bodies and to celebrate what they are. So at period parties, we encourage young people to design costumes, period costumes, so that they come and showcase their creative costumes about periods. We have poetry during the period parties, and our main goal for the period party is to engage the community in these conversations, because if the community is ignorant about the conversation, we are not making any change, because the stigma still exists. If people don't know about our bodies, if we don't explain to these boys how we feel, how we feel after them laughing at us, and we engage young boys and the men in our community, because we don't stay as women, or we don't stay as menstruators in our community. We live with men, we live with non-menstruators that don't know anything about menstruation. So with the period party, we engage the community to celebrate with us, to help young girls express themselves publicly, so that they get that confidence that they need to love and celebrate their bodies.
Wow. So what strikes me about both your stories is this kind of chain reaction where, you started off as just one person or a couple of people, and with, who just wanted to try and change something, and how both your initiatives have kind of grown and had this really organic kind of chain reaction, really, where more people have got involved and those people have helped other people. And it's quite amazing to hear about. But I guess it hasn't all been easy. And I'd love to hear more about the biggest challenge you faced as leaders and how you tackled it.
Definition of leadership, that's an interesting one. I think, first of all, it would be inspiring others, and it'd be inspiring others in pursuit of a shared goal or a passion or a cause. And I really feel that leaders today have such an opportunity to inspire others to lead and to drive change, but also to sort of ignite that sparking others to have a passion for a particular cause. And if I sort of reflect on my years sort of growing up and as a teenager, I was able to see, as I've said before, my mum, a working class woman, a black woman leading a charity. And I saw her traveling. At one point, she traveled to New York to set up specialist domestic violence courts. And just having that role model meant that I believed that I could lead. I also believed that I could run a charity. I also believed that I could travel and I could advocate for women's rights, because I was inspired by her leadership. So I do think a lot of leadership is about that inspiration and inspiring those around you to work towards something that's perhaps bigger than yourself.
Great. Sharitah, what about you?
I think I agree with what Cianne has said. I'll just add on, leadership to me is amplifying voices. A leader to me is someone that helps those ones without a platform to amplify their voice, their voices, to express what affects them at a platform where these voices are going to be heard. So that's what I call leadership to me.
Great. And that kind of leads on to my next question, which is really why do leadership and representation matter? So I don't know, Sharitah, if you want to add to what you've already said, why does it matter? Why do we need to lead? Why do we need to make sure that these voices are represented?
I think it's very, very, very important for a leader to amplify these voices, because not everyone in our community has an opportunity to get a platform to express themselves. Most of the cases when I was growing up, I didn't have an opportunity or a platform to make decisions by myself. Everything was decided for me. In our culture, it's the elders that make the decisions for everything. Although you have like an idea, you're going to keep it to yourself because everything is decided for you. Starting from like the way you're dressed is decided by the parent. The food that you're going to eat is decided by the parent. And the school that you're going to depends on the parent because of the financial and everything. So at least if you have like a platform and an opportunity to express yourself, like as if you're a leader, it's very important for one to amplify the voices of those ones that have no platform or an opportunity, because this is the reason why you become a leader. Representation is really very important because the people are the ones that give you the drive to lead. And if you're not working on the things that are affecting the people, you're not doing anything, you're doing it for yourself. So I think these voices really matter because these small voices become like bigger voices. When they become like bigger voices, and this is where the big decisions should be depended on, like in leading our community.
Absolutely. And just some of the things that Sharitah brought up around younger people not necessarily having a voice in the community, and I think that's present globally, isn't it? Young people often don't feel like they have a voice, and you have these leaders who perhaps have been in place for many years and they're just very out of touch with the issues that young people are concerned with. And I think the sort of representation that we've seen over the last few years, particularly around climate activism, so people like Vanessa Nakate, the Ugandan climate activist, and Elizabeth Watuti, who's the Kenyan climate activist, both of those young women are advocating for change, and they are now appearing on the global stage. And I think that's so important, that representation of young women, of young African women as well, who have gained a platform. And not only have they gained a platform, I think that they are inspiring other young African women, and they are sort of clearing or making a path for those women in the future as well. So yeah, I just think that representation in that way is so important.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like I take a lot of like time reading about like the politics and representation in Uganda, and I, as a youth in Uganda, I don't feel like I'm represented enough. Like especially on those tables where these big decisions are made. I'll share an experience that I had like with these offices. You know, we've been trying so much to register our organization to get the NGO permit, and like every time I visit these offices, the way people like present themselves to me, they like most of the times I'm ignored, and they don't pay any attention to what like what we are bringing to the community or the work and everything. You have to bribe all the way through the offices, and most of the time the people that we take into these big offices, they promise you everything when they are not yet in the big offices, but when you reach out to them, they don't actually help you like express yourself in this. And this is like very heartbreaking, and like it keeps us away from like pursuing even political careers in my community. You're like, if I'm not represented by the person that had promised like the whole community that they will help the community do this, they will help like uplift the image of young women in the community. If I'm not represented like that in those big offices, and like the people that we send in these big offices are just there when like people are making decisions about our bodies, like they're making laws, they're not influencing any policies in our community. So it discourages so many young people in pursuing like these careers. like in helping other people. Most of the time, like I reach out to my friends, like we have like community gatherings with like young people and youth. You find out that these youth have like creative ideas that they want to bring up that would be like very, very useful for our community if at all they have a big platform. But when you start engaging the community leaders into like these conversations, they don't take it any serious. So they make like decisions for us. I don't even know how good I can frame it. So many young people are discouraged because of the leadership style that many politicians are using in Uganda.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Sharitah, as well, because I think Sharitah was really sort of describing the very, it's more of this sort of autocratic, hierarchical leadership style that you find in so many places, whether that be within our public institutions or elsewhere globally. This is the sort of leadership style you generally see. And I think what we've been talking about is this style of leadership that is sort of moving away from that sort of traditional top-down approach, being a little bit more concerned and aware of being more inclusive. So I think Sharitah was touching on sort of the creativity of young people and the voices of young people and the voices of young women, and that not being heard. And I think in terms of the sort of leadership that I'd like to see and that I advocate for is this collective leadership, this idea of sisterhood as well. So women coming together, discussing how they want things to be, discussing what concerns them, and collectively deciding on a course of action. I think that is a very different approach to what we see globally. It's not the norm, but I very much think that it should be the norm. It should be the norm to sit down with people and to discuss with them how we can improve things. I think it should be the norm to take other people's opinion on board. And I think it should be the norm for us not, as leaders, to think that we know everything, because we don't. I don't think anybody knows everything. I think there's so much opportunity for us to learn from people around us. And I think true leadership is about having conversations with those around you, seeking input and making those collective decisions so that you are working towards a collective good and not the good that's envisaged by one person.
So what does it mean to you to lead like a feminist?
Leading like a feminist. Okay, first of all, I would say listening to others and realizing that you as one person probably don't have all the answers. So listening to others, collaborating with those around you to understand more and to educate yourself, and then using that listening to advocate for change. I think that's part and parcel of leading like a feminist.
Leading like a feminist to me is recognizing that there exists injustices and unfairness to some group of people and trying to do something about it. That is what I call a feminist to me. Thank you.
Thank you, that's great. And now my final question, there'll be people listening who want to lead like a feminist, who want to try and change the status quo. What would be your practical tips or advice for people?
I think my first practical tip would be to surround yourself with inspiring people who can act as mentors and also as sponsors for you. And when I say a mentor, I'm talking about someone who can provide you with advice and feedback. So if you want to move into leadership positions, finding people who are willing to give you some advice and feedback on how you can move into that space. And then when I talk about a sponsor, I mean reaching out to people who can not only mentor you, but can start to advocate for you as a person when you're not in the room. Finding those people who already have a platform, who can then speak about you on that platform and say, this person is someone that I think should move into leadership positions, or this person is someone that I think should have a voice, who has something to say. So I think those two people, a mentor and a sponsor, or a group of those people around you, are invaluable in moving into positions of leadership. And I'd also say, if you're interested in moving into positions of leadership, it's really important to start to research the people who are in the fields that you aspire to be in. Start looking for those people, start reaching out to them on LinkedIn, attending talks on the topics that you're passionate about, and networking with like-minded people, so that you're really surrounding yourself with a collection of people who are advocating for the sorts of work and ideas and causes that you're passionate about.
My only advice is, if you have that small voice in you that you think it's a good idea and it's a good voice, it could make change, start on working on that. Don't wait for it to be bigger, because that small voice, it takes time. So at least if you share what you think, your idea, you share it with someone, it could help you create even a bigger idea. So sharing is very important, and collaborating with other people. So don't keep that voice inside you. Just let it shine. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, when I show, yeah. Yeah, I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, when I show, yeah.
Okay, so now we're on to our podcast post-mortem. So Marlene, I think this idea of a chain reaction really stood out in what Cianne and Sharitah were saying. Like, they both had kind of started something that had grown organically. And actually they'd both also been first inspired by other people in their lives, and that enabled them to take that action. So there was this kind of domino effect that I think really stood out. And I know you've founded your own initiative. You do a lot of similar kind of work where you're just inspiring others. You know, you inspire me a lot. And I just wondered, how do you think these chain reactions start? What is it that sort of catalyzes this sort of very organic kind of change?
First of all, I will have to say that most of the people who are leaders in the charity sector or in the development and humanitarian sector are some of the people who have had to experience some of the most uncomfortable situations. And I think those experiences, personally, when I experienced the depression, and it was so hard for me to even get out. And I think it is one of the darkest moments where you have to, you hear people say that there is always light at the end of the tunnel, and you're at the darkest part of the tunnel, so you cannot even imagine that there will be light at some point. So, and as we heard of Cianne's talking about understanding, because you have to understand how uncomfortable people are in those situations so that you can think of a solution for them. And we hear of Sharitah's experience with the girl in the taxi, and it's such an uncomfortable situation when you see people experiencing stigma and you try to place yourself. So I think it's more about being empathetic. When you are able to place yourself in other people's shoes. So for example, when you try to, I have also done a number of projects in FGM and period stigma, period poverty, period shame. And I have to say, when you try to place yourself in the situation of the people experiencing it, it is very uncomfortable. You wouldn't imagine having your loved ones or yourself go through such an experience. It is so uncomfortable. You keep on thinking about it and you're like, I really need to do something about it. Like, there was this story about someone who, a young girl, I think she was 12 or between the age of 9 and 12, who committed suicide from an experience of period shame. I don't want to imagine what was going through her mind, while we all know that this is something that would have been avoided if people were a bit kinder, if people were more open to the idea that this is something that happens to every woman, and girls should have a different experience. I believe this was her first experience. This was her first period, and it happened in school. And trying to imagine a teacher mocking that, while they should be the same people who should empower the girl and tell them that, you know what, this is something that is going to happen. From this time, every month you will experience this, and this is how you go about it. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to feel ashamed. This is something that they would have experienced differently. So I believe that most of the feminist leaders have had an experience with something that really made them uncomfortable, and they had to get out of their comfort zone to try and find solutions for others. And I think that is where we have the ideology of we are trying to bring about change, or we are trying to fight these systems of oppression and injustice, so that the people who are going to come after us will not have to fight similar fights. It's the same case happens to people who are championing issues of racial inequality and all that. So it's more about having to come out of your comfort zone to start something, and also bring in other people so that they can be able to continue after you and even contribute towards the effort of bringing about change. So I believe it's something like that.
So it's it's based really on experience, this deep understanding of the experience of injustice. And I guess that is a mixture of personal experience, but I think it's really important that, like you say, it's not just personal experience, it's also empathy, because if we only have one personal experience, and it's always going to be limited, because we can only experience so many things in our life. And I think to really create social change, you have to understand your own experience in the context of others. And I think that's where the empathy comes in, and that's what creates these kind of more powerful changes. Because I think you can have your own experience and advocate based on it, which can be really powerful. But I think if you can extend that through empathy and connect that experience with the experiences of others, that's when you get this chain reaction. And I think periods are a really good example, because I think when if you speak to people all over the world, they have really similar experiences of stigma, and even though nobody's experience is exactly the same, they kind of they use their own experience to kind of build empathy with others. And actually then you get this kind of community that have a shared sense of injustice, and that's what kind of creates a movement. And so I think you're right, it all comes down to experience, and not just your own, but the ability to empathize with the experiences of others. And I also just wanted to ask you, I remember somebody said to me once, they were talking about, they were a very successful person, and they were talking about how, just because you fought hard to open a door doesn't mean that those that come after you should have to fight as hard. And she was saying, don't shut the door, leave the doors that you fight to open wide open. And I think that's perhaps a really important part of this chain reaction. It's about, like you say, having the fight so that others don't have to. But I wanted to think a bit about how we do that on a day-to-day basis, and whether there's things we can do to kind of make sure that the doors that we're opening stay open.
Funny thing is, it's actually similar to something that I've had when people say, when you're on your way up, you make sure that you pull others up with you. So when you're, and this even happens to in leadership. I have in my previous work, I have had to be in a place where I was so uncomfortable, and you found that some of the rules and even there's so much things that people have to tackle on their way up, and sometimes it gets you to an understanding where we are able to understand that these experiences are the ones that shape our journeys, but it is our journeys that form the chain reaction. So once you're able to understand your journey and you're including others to go up with you. So for example, you're a leader, you even get the chance to share skills. The more we empower others on our way up, is also an opportunity of enabling them to go through the same door without having to fight to get there. So it's more about empowering others to take after you. At the end of the day, it's not a matter of how good someone is. That is dependent on their talent, their skills, and even how they do things and how they communicate to others. So it's more about creating opportunities for yourself as well as others. And I think that is what it means by leaving the door open. You empowering another empowering another. And that, I think that is how we can all be able to attain change at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think it's also about finding ways, like you say, to share your opportunities. So actually, if you get an opportunity to speak, like, should it always be you that speaks, or could you share that opportunity with somebody else? If you're writing an article, like, could you write it with somebody and help to amplify their voice? Like, I think once you have some kind of platform, even if it's small, you know, or you should be thinking straight away, how can I share this with others? How can I use it to amplify the kind of voices and experiences of others, or to create opportunities for others to kind of develop their skills, rather than thinking I must hold on to this for myself because it's my stepping stone to the next thing. And I think it is a very different way to think about things, but I think that's what kind of keeps that chain reaction going, and also kind of keeps that door open. And you see people doing that, and you see people not doing that. And I think feminist leaders need to be doing that. They need to, every opportunity, every bit of power they get, every platform, they need to be thinking about how they can share that. And they won't always do it right, they won't always do it well, but they need to do it. I think.
Plus, I also think there is this bit of identifying what people are good at and giving them an opportunity to excel at it, because, you know, at the end of the day, we are not always good at everything. There are people who are really good at doing something specific. And I think it's also about being able to identify the uniqueness of others and giving them the platform to excel at it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Marlene. That was really, as always, that was really interesting.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, when I show, yeah.
If you like what you heard today, remember to subscribe to the Lead Like a Feminist podcast for information on new releases, and please do share with your family, friends, and social networks. You can also interact with us directly on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, or get in touch at leadlikeafeminist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on today's podcast. And finally, we'd like to say a massive thank you to Afrocolour Arts for helping to produce the podcast, and to the amazing Sherry Awasi for letting us use her track Be The Change. Do check out her full album Queendom on Spotify. It's pretty awesome. And also finally to Chelsea Madison for all her help with our social media. More from us next time, and in the meantime, keep on changing the status quo.